Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's event in the series Poli-Talks, Get Informed Before Elections. The series is co-hosted by Kerem House and Israeli Politics Simplified. Kerem House is a community-focused organization based in Tel Aviv. Since the beginning of COVID, they have focused on organizing outdoor and virtual events aimed to empower and engage Olim and young professionals in the city. Israeli Politics Simplified is a Facebook page dedicated to bringing Anglos in Israel unbiased, easy to understand information about Israeli politics and the upcoming election. I'm Meira, Lerner, creator of the Israeli Politics Simplified page, and I will be your host for this and upcoming events in this series. It's very easy to get confused and overwhelmed by the information overload that we see from the campaigns leading up to elections. We know that you, the voters, care about the issues and want to gain a better understanding of the political and election system and what the parties plan to do to meet your needs in the next government. This election is a truly important one, and our goal is to help you feel prepared and knowledgeable when you step into the voting booth next month. This and our upcoming events will be with candidates from different parties, and the discussion will be held in a panel format. We have carefully crafted and selected questions for our candidates that really hit on some of the issues that affect most of us on a day-to-day basis. Most of our focus will be on these issues in particular. I'll be asking these questions, and my guest today will be asking follow-ups to ensure that we will get a full answer and perspective. Joining me today is David Weiss. David lives in Karnei Shomron and is a content contributor on Israeli Politics Simplified. With us today is MK Yorai Lahav Hertzano, currently number 14 on the Yesh Atid list. Yorai Lahav Hertzano volunteered for IDF service after receiving an exemption for health reasons, and he served for approximately 6 years. He was chairman of the Tel Aviv-Yafo Student Council for 3 years. He headed the youth cell of the Shinui Party. In 2013, he joined Yesh Atid and founded and headed the Yesh Atid youth movement. He coordinated Yesh Atid's youth activities, wrote the party's youth platform, and ran for Herzliya City Council in the 3rd place on the Yesh Atid list. Yorai was elected to the 21st and 22nd Knesset. With that, it is my privilege to welcome MK Yorai Lahav Hertzano. Welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for the introduction, Meira. It's a pleasure to be with you this evening.
Thank you. Do you want to, before we really jump into the questions, do you want to maybe take a minute or two to just tell us a little bit more about you and Yesh Atid in a broad sense?
In the broad sense. So as you mentioned, I am not 33 years old, and I just completed my 3rd tenure as a member of the Israeli Knesset. We are in the midst of a national crisis in our democracy, in our country. And it's our responsibility to make sure that this ludicrous situation ends. We need to end it. We need to end the ongoing cycles of elections. And on the one hand, and I think this election is really on a very simple question: which kind of government do we want to see in Israel after these elections? Whether we want to see a fundamentalist, very extremist government led by Netanyahu, Ben-Gvir, Smotrich, and Litzman, or we want to see a pragmatic, liberal, centrist government led by Yesh Atid, Saar, Bennett, and more parties. This yesterday and today I saw in a polling platform or video made by Yadut Torah of dehumanizing reform and conservative Jews, and that shocks me. Not just as a Jew, I'm a proud Jew, I'm an Israeli. It shocks me because the worst kind of anti-Semites use those kinds of comparisons to dehumanize Jews, to haunt us, and I think we need to bring it to an end. We are going to places I don't think we want to see our country going to, and that's essentially what Yesh Atid brings to the table: sanity, bringing to the table the moral grounds and the infrastructure, the moral infrastructure to build and create a sane government which will serve the vast majority of all Israelis and not just a sector or two.
So thank you very much. And with that, let's launch right into some of these questions so that we can hear even more about Yesh Atid's plans.
Sure.
Okay, so the COVID pandemic has created an unemployment crisis, the likes of which we've never seen before. Some career fields, for example, anything in the tourism and hospitality industries, are completely altered with no way of knowing when they'll be back at full speed. Can you tell us what Yesh Atid's plan is to bring people back to work and open those industries up, and what your party's plan to combat the mass shutdown and suffering of small businesses is?
Sure. I think that's Meira. That's the biggest failure of the Israeli government during the COVID pandemic. First of all, we need to end the broken system for low stipends and unemployment benefits. This bubble will eventually blow up and burst in June of 2021, leaving about 1 million Israelis without a job. We need to implement immediately the German model of unemployment that basically incentivizes employment to bring back employees back to work. Parallel to that, and in addition to that, we need to help small businesses and in need of immediate assistance. Yesh Atid will provide, we prefer the Tzuk Eitan, the protective edge model of lost reimbursement. We will provide, again and again, we are proposing unemployment payments for benefits for small business owners, which was rejected by this government and the last government, both led by Netanyahu. I don't know if you want to get into it, but last week we introduced a Green New Deal, which is our plan to kickstart the Israeli economy by creating thousands on thousands of quality workplaces and jobs, while investing in growth engines and combating climate change, which I consider personally as one of my generation's greatest challenges and one of the greatest challenges faced by humankind as a whole.
We're actually going to be hitting on the environment a little bit later,
Okay.
But for now, David, do you want to ask a follow-up question on this topic?
Sure. So I'll jump in. You specifically mentioned climate change. Some people might be a little bit skeptical and say, Israel's a really small country. How much of an impact can we really have on climate change? What would you respond to those people who say it doesn't really matter what we do to really impact climate change? You have to be a big country like the US, China, India, etc. So how would you respond to that claim?
I'd say that we need to contribute our part in the global effort to combat climate change. I think that we are way back after the United States, especially with the new administration in the United States. President Biden mentioned that combating climate change is one of the 3 top priorities of the new administration. And we are way back. We need to contribute, and it's not just, a metaphorical struggle. It affects our everyday life. It endangers our health, our children, our environment. We've all seen the ecological disaster that hit our beaches and our shores in last week. Israel wasn't prepared for such an ecological disaster. We didn't have a plan for such a disaster, and how we faced it was very bad. And so I think that it's in our national interest to combat climate change. And we introduced, if Meira will allow me, I will elaborate more on our new Green New Deal, which essentially is meant to achieve two goals. One is to kickstart the Israeli economy, because investing billions of shekels in renewable energies, in increasing recycling, will provide and create thousands on thousands of new quality jobs. But it will also kickstart the economy, because every cent or every agora that you invest in those kinds of industries, multiply by 7, you get 7 times more than what you invest. So you battle or combat global warming and climate change, and at the same time achieve the kinds of results you want to see in terms of recovering your economy, which is in a very bad situation right now. And if to go back to the economic sphere, David, I'm a young adult. As Meira mentioned, I'm the youngest member of Knesset, and my friends are collapsing. They are returning back from their rental apartments to their parents' houses. They lost their jobs. And I'm asking myself, what is the message my government wants to send to my generation? Is it stay at home, get your 70% of what you earned, do nothing, don't contribute, go to the beach, don't be productive? Is that the message my government wants to send to my generation? Creating a lost generation. And I say, no, we need to stop or fix the follow broken program or system. We need to get my generation back to the workplaces. We need to incentivize employers to receive and rehire the one that were dismissed during the COVID pandemic. And so this is a drastic change of mentality or policy. This government is sentencing, no less, is sentencing my generation to poverty and being not productive. That's not the message governments should send to the young adults in their country. And so we will fix it, because I think it's very destructive in terms of the mentality of young adults in Israel, my friends.
Thank you. We'll actually be touching on a lot of those topics as we move forward, but I would like to move on to the next one. It's no secret that we have a major housing crisis in this country right now. Young families all over the country would like to buy homes, and that dream is made impossible by astronomical prices, limited options in central locations, and bureaucratic processes that are difficult to navigate. Despite programs like Mahir Lemishtaken, which have very specific requirements that many young home buyers don't meet and more often than not don't win, there aren't very many affordable options for people to purchase homes. No less important, rent in many areas, especially the more central locations, is incredibly high. What is Yesh Atid's plan to solve this, and how will you implement it?
Well, I have not a typical, an atypical answer to that, Meira, because you would normally expect a politician to say, well, we're going to incentivize real estate constructors to build more houses for buying. Well, that's our first answer, because when you have more houses for purchasing, the prices will be lowered. But our program is, again, change the mentality of Israelis. We, as opposed to many different young adults around the world, we strive for a place of our own, to own it. Because I don't know if it's, second or third or fourth generation to the Holocaust, we need to be able to live in our own place, owned by ourselves. And we say, no, that's okay, that can work for some, but we want to give the young adults of Israel some more options. So what we propose, and we implemented it in the past when Yorai Lahav was finance minister, he created a national corporation called Diaspora, an apartment to rent, which basically said that we are going to incentivize real estate constructors to acquire lands and build long apartments which you could rent for a long period of time in subsidized rent, which will not increase each year in double digits percentage. And it would allow young couples in Israel to live in a very good apartment, because it's new. They will be able to make their rent, because it's going to be supervised and not going to increase annually. And in the meantime, during 5, 10, or 15 years, they'll be able to save enough funds to acquire and own their own apartment. So this is not just a dream. Yorai Lahav has implemented this program, and I have friends living in Diaspora apartments in Herzliya, in Gliliam, in Haifa, in Kiryat Gat. And so, in addition to increasing the supply of new housing for purchase, we need to create a different market for long-term renting, in order to give the young adults of Israel more choices, so they can economize their future better.
Great. David, do you have anything for this topic?
Sure. So I actually grew up in New York, and in New York, there is a whole big issue of rent control. So is what you're proposing something similar to rent control?
Not exactly, because rent control in New York, as I understand it, is making the supervision by the state on private owners. And so that's not the case. The case is that the government is going to lease on lahkir, on a long-term lease of the ground of the two contractors who are going to build long-term rent apartments. And so essentially a part of the program is going to be that some of the apartments in those buildings are going to be supervised. So it's not privately owned by companies or by individuals. And so it's basically the same idea, but implemented in a different way.
Do you have an estimate for how much something like this would cost? Because you're saying that the government is essentially footing the bill, that they're paying the bill for these additional rental units.
It's going to the government will subsidize the program by offering discounts on the ground being offered to the real estate constructors. I don't have the specifics now, but it's an economic program which was already implemented, so I can look it up and give you the numbers.
Thanks, Yorai. The next topic is on cars. Cars are expensive, environmentally destructive, and in city centers, there's no parking. Furthermore, cities like Tel Aviv are phasing out parking spaces in favor of walkways, bike, and scooter lanes. What are your plans to make us less reliant on cars?
Israel, according to the Paris Accords of 2015, has signed on to reducing the numbers of private cars on our roads by 20% until 2030. Until now, 5 years or 6 years later, the number wasn't reduced. It was increased by 15%. That's a very bad implementation of our obligations. So we will invest billions of shekels over the next 10 years to upgrade our public transportation to the periphery of Israel, mainly to long and distant cities, and to Arab cities in Israel which lack public transportation. We are going to we are going to switch our buses from fuel to electric by 2030, and offer incentives for individuals to switch from fuel-based cars to Teslas and electric cars. I think that we can say with absolute guarantee that in the next decade, all of our cars in Israel, private and public vehicles, will be electric based, and we need to create more bike lanes in urban areas, connecting them to large employment centers and to mass transportation centers. And so we need to make the Israelis feel more comfortable using public transportation without feeling that their days are spent endlessly waiting for buses that will never come. And as a young adult in Israel, when I travel to the US, when I travel to Western countries in Europe, I don't rent a car. It's obvious that public transportation is reliable, accessible, and reachable. I can reach wherever I want, whenever I want. And in terms of that, we need to make sure that the public transportation works in a different intensity during weekends as well. And so we are going to make sure that we are going to create more lines during nighttime and less line or do it. There's a question later on about municipality and local government. So in that respect, I think that local government need to make decisions about when, where, and how to operate public transportation on weekends, so that in secular neighborhoods, people will be able to leave their car or dispose of it, because they know that during on Shabbat or on Friday, they'll be able to go to the beach and visit their relatives without their personal car.
It's definitely a dream that I'm sure a lot of young people would like to see happen. I know that it's a real struggle. Before we continue on, I'd like to welcome those who are first tuning in now. I'm Meira Lerner, the creator of Israeli Politics Simplified, and I'm co-hosting a discussion today along with Kerem House with MK Yorai Lahav Hertzano from Yesh Atid. He's number 14 on the list. And we are speaking about some of the core issues relevant for this election cycle. So continuing on, we have a lot of parents that are tuning in for this event, and many of them are concerned about our current education system. Over the years, there have been many plans to change how education is approached in this country. We'd love to address a few issues in particular and hear what Yesh Atid's plans are. First, the major disparity between school vacation days and workforce vacation. This in particular puts a huge strain on working parents and drives up the expenses for childcare. Second is curriculum and what it is that we are teaching our children. Some feel that more curriculum decisions should be made by school principals and that curriculum and education focus should move away from learning for tests and more towards experiential learning, life skills, and general knowledge. What is Yesh Atid's stance on these issues, and what is the plan to implement any changes you'd like to see made?
Wow, that's the most important question because this is the most important issue. Education is investing in our future, in the future of our children, in our national strength as a nation, and in our national security. And so I'm afraid I just saw on the news 2 weeks ago, I think that the Education Minister Yoav Gallant just graded himself 90 during the COVID pandemic. Israel is number 1 in the world in lost days of school during the last year. That's a failure. That's a complete failure. School is not babysitting. And so we need to make sure that our children are better equipped with the best tools that we can give them so they can chase away their dreams as far as possible. It doesn't matter if you want to be a rocket scientist or physicist or the president of Israel, you should have the best tools and the best training to achieve and accomplish your dreams. And that's the role of any country, let alone the Jewish country that is based on education. And so you mentioned the curriculum, and I think that we need to minimize the number of tests, the final tests, Bagrut, that we are facing. I took 17 Bagrut exams 15 years ago. The number just increased, I think. And so we need to focus on quality learning, on being able, everyone today has the entire information on earth on the palm of his hand, on iPhone or on Galaxy. And so the task or the challenge that we need to face is how to make out of the sea of information the relevant and most important things, and know how to use them and extract the tasks or the challenges that we need to overcome. So small groups, creative methods, and yes, we are not there in Israel, and we need to do better doing that. We need to empower principals and teachers. That's the core of our ability to strengthen the education. And I think that if during the last year, teachers and mainly principals would have received more power in terms of how to manage the situation, things would have looked different. And so, yes, and yes. If you'd like me to elaborate on a specific issue, I'll.
So before I do just want to ask before we follow up on that. I would really like to know if there is some kind of plan to address the vacation day disparity, because that's a really big issue, I know, for a lot of working parents in particular.
Yesh Atid invented what is called Keitana Shel HaChofesh HaGadol, the summer camp during school, during the holidays. This is the government just introduced a plan to make some sort of that summer camp during July, I don't think it's relevant because they haven't done the preparation and the staff work needed in order to implement such a program. But yeah, we think that vacations, especially this year, should be shortened. And I hope that when the new government will be introduced in April, that's the first thing on our priority, and we would make sure that the gaps, that the unbelievable gaps of this year would be addressed and narrowed as much as possible. Not because the parents need to go to work, but because this is our future. Education is the main tool that those children have in order to achieve their dreams. And so, yeah, important. Economy is important, and the parents' ability to go and off to work is very important. But most important is to make sure that we bring everyone back to school before we open the malls and before we open cafes. That's a very bad prioritizing by the government. And I'd like to give you one more example, Meira.
Sure.
Special needs education. They by law, they deserve to have a long day of education, special needs children. And so this government did not implement the law after the third lockdown was ended. And I sent 3 letters about the need to return the whole day for special needs children to Gallant, to Minister Gallant, and those letters weren't answered. It's according to the law. There's a law specifying what those needs are entitled to. And so he ignored, and he didn't return those the long day for special needs children. And so the Supreme Court of Israel ruled and instructed him to return to a full day of school for those special needs children by Sunday. And I asked myself, why do we need the Supreme Court of Israel to instruct the education minister to take care of the special needs children? Why doesn't he do it without an instruction by a higher authority? I really don't understand this, and this leads to my last sentence about education. I'm very troubled about the implications of a maybe potential government by Netanyahu, because Netanyahu pushed forward. He basically threw Ben Gvir, who's the follower of Kahana, the heir of Kahana, back into the Knesset. Shamir, the prime minister from the Likud, used to exit the Knesset hall when Kahana used to address the Knesset hall. And his successor, Netanyahu, pushed them into the Knesset. Kahana, Ben Gvir, those of you who don't know him, Kahana, Ben Gvir hanged a picture of Baruch Goldstein in his salon, and inside his house, Baruch Goldstein slaughtered 29 Arabs just because they were Arabs, injuring hundreds of them. And this man, Ben Gvir, is going to be in the next coalition of Israel. And I ask myself, Meira, in terms of education, what would teachers explain about Baruch Goldstein? That he was right? That he did something just? That it's in our Jewish morality to murder and slaughter innocent people because they're Arabs? What is our expectations of the education? Maybe it's going to be the education minister of Israel or the justice minister of Israel. What would the teacher be instructed to say about Baruch Goldstein, about Kahana, about the legacy?
I really appreciate your thoughts. And as a parent myself, I really appreciate how strongly you feel about this issue in particular. But we would like to move on to a different facet of education in general,
Please.
More on the higher education level. More and more universities seem to provide less value and job assurance. As new jobs are created, more of the workforce is having a hard time. Does Yesh Atid have plans to update what is taught in academia and or train and retrain the older and unskilled workforce?
That's a very good question. And I have 2 layers of answer for it. First of all, I don't think that we need to force any changes in academia, because academic freedom is the core of academic studies and research. We need to maintain the immunity of the academia to research whatever they feel they need to research, and be able to speak their minds and their opinions freely. That's a sacred place. We will not attempt to breach the academic freedom to research and conduct free research. We see what's happening in Poland regarding the persecution of researchers studying the Holocaust, and we don't want to be Poland or go in that direction. However, the linkage between graduates and the workforce is very bad in Israel. Unlike the United States and most Western countries in Europe, we don't have internship programs. In addition, there is a crazy situation in Israel, or rather not crazy, bizarre, where if you're a student from MIT, you can come to Israel using Masa programs or Taglit Excel and be able to train and do an internship in an Israeli company, receive the experience and the line in the CV that you get from such an experience, go back to your country, and because you are experienced, you can get better jobs. Israeli students aren't able to do that. And so, because in Israel, we have labor laws which prevent us from creating such a status as interns. So Yesh Atid is I proposed a legislation that creates such a status in Israel, and we are going to subsidize and pay for a year of internship once for every graduate in relevant subjects, because we have lawyers and accountants who have an internship just installed in their training. And we are going to refresh the professional training, because it's the current programs within the labor ministry are very backdated and are not equipped to facing the challenges or the wishes or the ambitions of young adults of Israel. So we are going to, first of all, subsidize and create interns or internships, and second, invest large amounts of funds into creating up-to-date, relevant professional training that will enable more people to enter the workforce and in quality jobs.
So I have a question here.
Yeah, I was going to let David jump in. Go ahead, David.
Sure. So during the last couple of answers, you mentioned the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Labor. We also discussed higher education, and there's a special ministry for higher education, which makes me wonder, what's the difference between education and higher education? And this topic seems to go for a lot of things. We have Minister for Cybersecurity, Water, Social Equality, Settler Affairs. I'm a mitnachel. I live in Karnei Sharon. I have no idea what the Minister for Settler Affairs does, just like my friends in Jerusalem have no idea what the Minister for Jerusalem Affairs does. Can you tell me what Yesh Atid's plan is to reduce the number of ministers?
Hey, before you answer, Yorai, do you just want to pay attention to the time? Because I know that this is a big question, and I'm sure that you have quite a lot to say on it.
No, I just one. It's a rather quick answer because we took care of it in the past. Yesh Atid legislated a law which restricted the number of ministers to 18. So we won't have a minister for water and a minister of imaginative communities, Orly Levy Abaxis. And once Netanyahu fired Yesh Atid's ministers and he canceled the legislation. So one of our main promises is to reduce the number of ministers to 18, because the situation in the midst of a national and health crisis, we don't need a government made out of 36 ministers and 16 deputy ministers. This is crazy. This is crazy. Bizarre and crazy.
Great. Okay. So many of our audience members are Olim. A lot of us still have family living all over the world. We have seen a growing divide between Israeli and diaspora Jews. Many in the diaspora feel disconnected to the country. They feel that Israel should be a homeland to all Jews, and therefore their values should be reflected in the way matters concerning all Jews are handled. Can you share your thoughts on this issue and whether you think we are doing enough to address it? And in addition, many diaspora Jews are experiencing a rise in anti-Semitism and are looking to Israel to guide and help them. What is Yesh Atid's plan to combat these issues?
First of all, I encourage Jews all around the world to make Aliyah, and people who are Zionists. And I know, Meira, you are a very passionate Zionist yourself. My mother immigrated alone, made Aliyah alone, leaving her family behind in Belgium, and made Aliyah to Israel in order to join the IDF, and stayed here and formed the family. So this is the place of all Jews, and yet we are not at the place. We are not there yet. When rabbis, reform and conservative rabbis, are not treated equally and respectfully in Israel, when Giyur is just very limited, not all Jews feel at home here. And so Israel was created in order so that every Jew in the world, no matter what his dominion would be, that he would feel at home here. And so we need to make more room for every Jew in the world to live their own life according to their own convictions here in Israel. I'm a secular Jew. I'm a member of the gay community here in Israel, LGBT. And the fact that I cannot marry the love of my life, the fact that I cannot form a family is not okay. And I think that this country was created so that everyone could live here freely according to their own convictions and beliefs. And we need to achieve it better. And we feel very strongly about creating more room for every Jew of all dominion nations, and end the Orthodox monopoly on Judaism.
David, do you have a follow-up on this one?
Sure. So when you were discussing the idea of religion and state, there was something that came to mind. When Yesh Atid was first founded around 2012, I recall it being a party that was meant to include everyone, religious, secular, Ethiopians, Russians, everyone could feel welcome in Yesh Atid. However, during the 2018 mayoral elections, I recall walking around Petach Tikva and I saw signs, it said Yesh Atid ha-miflaga ha-chilonit, something of that nature. Do you feel that Yesh Atid is sort of pushing out some of the religious elements of the party? You know, Rav Shai Piron is no longer there, Rav Dov Lipman's no longer there, and it's sort of taking on this body as being maybe more of the secular party.
I think that, on the contrary, I don't think that Yesh Atid is secular. I think that Yesh Atid represents all of Israel. We have Elazar Stern, who's Orthodox and religious, and Kinley, Moshe Torpaz, who's Orthodox and religious, and we have three members of Knesset or candidates as of now that are from Russian origin. We have secular and religious. We represent the entire Israeli population, and we are very proud of it. Yesh Atid is a centrist, pragmatic party. Having said that, we strongly believe that in order to maintain a Jewish and democratic country where everyone would feel at home here, we need to increase the separation between religion and state, or if I want to be more accurate, between religion and the political sphere in Israel. I don't think that forcing Judaism on anyone would strengthen the Jewish identity of Israel. The fact that people aren't able to marry here without going the religious path, I think that it's doing bad service to Judaism and to the Jewish religion. And so Yesh Atid would continue strengthening the Jewish identity of Israel, not through forcing it on anyone, but rather creating more room for all kinds of Judaism. And I think that's our strength, and that's what makes us so special and strong, and not it doesn't weaken us.
So in the Yesh Atid's dream world, would you support same-sex marriage, civil unions, something in between? What do you see as the end goal?
Sure. Yesh Atid, I mean, we have legislations on that. We have bills. We are going to introduce civil marriage so that every two individuals in Israel will be able to choose whether to marry on the religious path, in the Rabbanut, or in the civil path in the municipality or in the interior ministry. And so, of course, and that's basic. I mean, it doesn't make our country less Jewish. I think that it increases the Jewish identity of Israel because it gives service to all Jews. I'm a Jew, and the fact that my country doesn't allow me to marry here and have children here, it doesn't make any sense. I mean, not to me. I need to go to a different country and marry and have children, but this is my country. My mother and grandparents immigrated here because they were persecuted there, and I'm not allowed to have my basic civil liberties. Not just me, but if my sister and her husband, they are both Jewish and they are both Israelis from birth. He is a combat fighter in the IDF, and they chose not to marry religiously because they said to me, no one is going to force me to do something I don't want. And I'm telling you that if the option was given to them, they would marry religiously in the Rabbanut. But because people are forced to go on the Orthodox path, and that's the only option, people are saying, well, no one's going to force me. I'm a grown up. I've done all that my country asked for me, and then some more. I paid all my dues. I'm paying taxes. I deserve to have my civil liberties. And I think that's a fair demand, David.
Thank you, Yorai. I really appreciate the answer. Going back to how you started off answering the last question, I have to say I really appreciate your call to Aliyah in general. But as many of us here know, the process of making Aliyah and integrating afterward is really not a simple matter. Many times people make Aliyah and struggle to find work, adapt to the language, and ultimately they return to their country of origin because they felt that they couldn't make it work. This seems to fly in the face of Zionist vision and values. What will Yesh Atid do to encourage and facilitate Aliyah and assist those who come when they get here with things like employment and housing?
Okay, so I'll just repeat the first sentence of my last question. I think that we have a moral and legal obligation to encourage Aliyah and to provide the ideal absorption process here in Israel. And we need to make sure that every Ole and Ola are received here in the best way possible. I think that we need to help them with the bureaucracy process, which is very difficult. We need to invest and make sure that all professional degrees and diplomas are recognized throughout the Israeli system. We need to expand the programs to integrate Olim into the public service in Israel, in all government offices. We need increased representation, especially for Ethiopian Olim, and we need to update the Merkaz Klita system so that everyone will feel invited and receive an efficient welcome to Israel in terms of all the services need to be provided to them, and to support every requirement that Olim ask for. I mean, that's the purpose of that's the key element to why Israel is here, and we need to do more to make you guys or the next Olim feel invited and welcomed here.
Thank you so much. Again, for those who are just joining in, we are having a discussion with Yorai Lahav Hertzano, MK, from the Asiateed party, number 14 on the list. This discussion is being co-hosted by Israeli Politics Simplified and Kerem House as part of our Poli-Talks series. Since the start of the pandemic, a lot of attention has been given to the municipalities and whether they should be given more power to make decisions regarding lockdowns and regulations for their own citizens. Many of the country's mayors have called for handing the reins over to them, expressing their greater understanding of the needs and capabilities of their own neighborhoods and citizens. What are your feelings on this matter? Would Yesh Atid support a move in this direction, and what would you do to implement that? Are there any specific powers that you would give a municipality that is currently federal?
The answer is yes. And I think, as you mentioned in your question, Meira, that the COVID pandemic and the failure of the general government, the national government, has demonstrated that we need to give more power and authority to the local governments in Israel who could manage the situation better. And I think that that needs to be the case, because local governments and municipalities are more familiar with their local communities. They know their needs, they know their challenges, and they are better equipped to understanding how to cope with those challenges. And so, yes, I was a member of the Corona committee in the Knesset, and we explicitly called to transfer powers over the management of the crisis to the local government, and it wasn't done. And so it's not a matter just to hand over powers, but also to create a system of incentives. And so when you say to a certain municipality, if you go green, you can open up stores, you can go and open up schools, they will make sure to take the appropriate measurements to meet those requirements. But if the local governments remain they're not weak, but they don't have a lot of authorities that are needed in order to combat the COVID. Other than the COVID, which I think that there's a consensus over the fact that those local governments should have received those authorities. Other than that, I've mentioned the issue of public transportation, especially on weekends. I live in Herzliya, and I don't see a reason why in Herzliya, which is basically, most of it are secular. Most of the neighborhoods in Herzliya are secular, and people want to use public transportation on Shabbat or on weekends. And I wouldn't dream of sending buses into Mea Shearim or Bnei Brak. I don't want to cause any disturbance to people. But I think that giving local governments the authority to decide on which kind of vehicles, if you take mini buses, which are electric and cause less noise, and run them through secular cities or neighborhoods in Herzliya, I think that would be better for everyone. So I think that we need to transfer powers in terms of public transportation, on handling emergencies. Even we need to reflect on giving them authorities to marry, as in the United States, for example. And so, yeah, we need to strengthen the authorities given to local governments. I think that's a very good policy, and we will work on implementing it.
So now it's time to go back to our environment question. As I know that this is something that you feel very strongly about, and you've clearly expressed a need for making some changes. It's clear that Israel has a pollution problem, from Haifa's air quality to trails and campsites turning into litter pits, to our huge consumption of plastics and disposables. Israel is not an example of startup nation when it comes to environmental policy. In fact, during his English-speaking interview, Gideon Saar, who I know is not your party head, but he was asked a writing question by Kerem House co-founder Daniel Elbogen, asking him what his plans were for the environment, and he didn't have an answer then. So we'd like to ask you, what are your plans for the environment, and are there any educational and cultural changes in particular that you would support to address the need for environmental change?
Wow, Meira, I think that's one of the biggest challenges that my generation is facing, and we are basically fighting for our future and for our survival. And I think that this issue was overlooked and ignored by the Israeli government for far too long, and we are going to change that. Yesh Atid is going to introduce a Green New Deal, investing 6 billion shekels in introducing or adopting rather renewable energies, basically solar energies. We set up goals to reach by 2030, 45% of our electricity needs to be made by solar energy. By 2050, we need to reach zero carbon emissions in Israel. In addition, we need to invest to increase recycling and increasing the reuse of recyclable materials in our economy, making it zero or almost zero carbon-based economy. We need to switch all of our cars, whether it's public or private, to electric vehicles, and to greatly invest in infrastructure that support electric vehicles. And we need to introduce green standards of building and renew whole areas in our cities. We need to preserve green parks and natural and there is Reches Lavan in the mountains of Jerusalem. We need to stop the bad intentions to ruin thousands of trees and destroy the beautiful side that there is there in order to build houses and buildings. And basically this is the main issue and challenge for us in the future, and we are going to tackle it directly as one of the main points that the next government of Israel is going to be focused if Yesh Atid will be forming the government.
Okay, so now as far as mixed zone spaces, with shops on the bottom floors and apartments on the top, they reduce the need for cars and travel in general. Yet aside from Gindi Towers in Tel Aviv and a few other examples, zoning in Israel prevents builders from building mixed zone structures. What are your plans to change zoning to allow for new construction like this?
We are for combined purposes zoning. I think that building cities which are people are going there to sleep and then going to work is not a very good idea. It's not environmental, it's not social, and we need to make the zoning better to house the needs of the Israeli citizens and our lives. And I think that most cities in the world, big cities and successful cities, include such a planning that includes multiple purposes, and that's the future, and that's what it's a very specific question, but and it's very it's very niche.
We have a lot of Tel Aviv citizens watching in the audience, and this is in particular interest with a lot of them.
That's the case in Tel Aviv, but not just Tel Aviv. Haifa is multi-purpose, and Tel Aviv and New York and Paris. I mean, that's how you build a city, and I think that Modi'in is not a very good example in that. I know that you're a resident of Modi'in,
yes,
which is a great city, but I think that in this specific question or in this specific area, it's not very multi-purpose. I mean, you don't see many neighborhoods there that have in industry, small businesses, markets, and living areas. And I think that's the key ingredient to building a good community, which is the need in order to create a very good city.
So I have one last surprise policy question for you. In the past, Yesh Atid and Yair Lapid have been very clear about their stance on the Haredi draft and the need to reform the draft laws. But the understanding that any attempt to drive more Haredim into the army will be met with mass resistance from them, and that the army will likely be unable to draft and process a mass influx of Haredim at this point. Are there any other alternatives that Yesh Atid is considering to bring Haredim into national service in general and the workforce?
That's a very good question. And the legislation that Yesh Atid led in 2013 said that every young adult at the age of 18 needs to go to the Bakum, to the enlistment center, and there the military, the IDF, would decide whether to enlist them to the IDF or send them to national service in the hospitals, in the ministries, at their local communities. So the issue was that everyone at the age of 18 needs to contribute to our country. It wasn't to enlist the Haredim into the military, not necessarily. I mean, the military would decide who would enlist, and we would go and do national service. Our legislation also canceled the tie between not serving your country and not going to work. I mean, before Yesh Atid's legislation in 2013, if you didn't enlist to the military, you wouldn't be able to go and join the workforce. You need to go and study at the yeshiva. So basically what we said is, first of all, let's break the chain and make sure that everyone who wish to join the workforce and go out to work. And parallel to that, make sure that everyone contributes, because we have one law and everyone needs to adhere to it. So the question, if you ask me if you are going to legislate it once again, yeah, sure. I want to live in a country where everyone is equal in front of the law and everyone needs to adhere to the law. If you ask me, the main purpose of the law Yesh Atid passed in 2013 wasn't to necessarily enlist the Haredim into the military, but rather make sure that they are included in the workforce and make sure that they contribute in somehow to the Israeli public, to their own communities. And I think that's basic citizenship. And yes, we would repropose the bill and turn it into legislation once again. I think that maybe the rhetorics will be different and the way to achieve the legislation will be different. I mean, I'm a big supporter of building bridges. And I think that if we can manage to have a discourse and bridge the gaps between our perspective and the Haredim perspective, that would be better both on that issue and on math and science and English in all the schools of Israel. That's not against the Haredim, not serving your country it's not against the Haredim. Studying math or English or science, it's not against the Haredim. I mean, Rambam most of the great rabbis were better educated than most of us. So I'm for equality, if that wasn't clear.
I think we got it. It's very, very clearly stated. I'm actually going to hand the reins over to David now. I know that he has a bunch of questions that he'd like to follow up on to bring us to a close. So I'm going to hand it over to him. David?
Sure.
But you're going to stay, Meira.
I'm not going anywhere. I'm here.
Okay.
So I feel like every time we discuss the elections, right before election season, everyone decides we have to discuss what's going to be the day after and what the coalition is going to look like. I've heard from different sources within Yesh Atid that they don't want to sit with Bibi because he's under indictment, so that basically means the Likud is out. They don't want to sit with Smotrich and Ben Gvir for being racist, so that party's out. They don't want to sit with the joint list, Ram, the Haredi parties, because they're not Zionist. My feeling is that it doesn't seem that Yesh Atid could form a coalition with all these conditions. And even within the parties left, it seems that, it would require Meretz sitting with Yisrael Beitenu and Yamina. I don't know how likely that is. So what do you say to people who say that a vote for Yesh Atid is just a vote for another election, because how are you guys going to be able to form a coalition? On
the contrary, I think that if we look at the numbers, David, there is a stable government without the factions that you just mentioned. We have over 61 mandates, and the main questions the Israeli voters will have to decide on what sort of government is going to be formed, whether it's going to be Netanyahu, Ben Gvir, Smotrich, Deri, a racist, xenophobe, homophobe, fundamentalist government, or a government made by centrist parties. Bennett, Saar, Lapid are the main cores of that government. And within that government, which Netanyahu cannot sit in or be a part of, the voters need to decide which values will lead the next government, whether it's the values of Yesh Atid, which says that Israel is supposed to be the homeland of all Jews, a Jewish and democratic country where everyone is equal in front of the law, which protects the Supreme Court rather than weakens it, that keeps the public sphere in Israel open on weekends, etc. If those values are important to people, they should vote Yesh Atid, and within that changed government, we would lead the way. If not, they can vote to different change parties, which are less, I don't want to say old, but Yesh Atid is very, we're 9 years old. We have an ideology. We didn't abandon our values and beliefs. We are very consistent in what we want to see and what we legislate. And so in terms of stability and in terms of keeping up with our beliefs and our ideology, Yesh Atid is a safe vote, David.
Yeah, actually, you said Yesh Atid is a young party at 9 years old, but by Israeli standards, a party that lasts 9 years. That's impressive. It seems like every election cycle we have totally new parties coming up and changing, merging, etc.
So in terms of that, David, Yamina and Sa, which are our potential partners, they're very new parties. Maybe old politicians and new hopes, but in terms of that, Yesh Atid is a senior party. We have roots, we have ideology. We didn't abandon our values. We didn't zigzag. It's a safe vote for one, a new government of change, and two, for making sure that our values, central liberal values, are going to lead the next government and pave the path, and not be just a sidebar with Bennett and Saar, which are ultra right, and Yesh Atid won't get 61, so we need to compromise. We will have to compromise as much as we don't get mandates. If we are strong and big, we'll have to compromise less.
So I guess also on the topic of strategy, in previous sessions that Meira and I have had where we've discussed the strategic end of elections, one of the things we discussed was the threshold. So currently, to get into the Knesset, you need to get at least 3.25% of the vote. Those are the rules as they currently stand. If I remember correctly, when Yair Lapid ran back in 2013, he wanted to even raise the threshold to 6%, and he ended up compromising on 3.25. Fine. Do you think that maybe that was a bit of a mistake to raise the threshold? Because all it seems to have done is it made a lot of parties run and they just missed the threshold. So lots of votes get wasted. You end up having these sort of unnatural alliance, such as Kahol Lavan in the last election, where you had all of these different factions running together. I mean, you have on the right, on the left, the center. It seems like everyone runs together. Meretz and Yamin and Avodah have run together. Yamina has been made up of all of these different things. So do you feel that raising the threshold might have caused the problem of the, let's call it the electoral stalemate that we're currently in?
On the contrary, I feel like I'm saying
that's fine.
On the contrary, David, I think that we needed to raise the threshold a bit higher to 5 or 6%. And I think that the immersions of Yesh Atid and Chosen Israel, the blue and white party, it was called for. We created a big party that was an alternative to the corrupt government of Netanyahu, and the problem wasn't the joining of forces, but the Benny Gantz collapsed. He collapsed and he caved into Netanyahu just before we completed the transition of powers, and that was the problem. And so I hope, in terms of the political sphere and situation, that Benny Gantz would make it the responsible decision that if he doesn't meet the threshold, he would not run eventually. And in terms of labor and Meretz, I don't see any difference between them in this race, and I don't see why they shouldn't have merged together, and so I don't think that the problem is the high threshold percentage, but rather we need to make it a bit higher because
Yeah.
I really do you see a difference between Meretz and Avoda?
Actually, I was going to just say, I spoke not long ago with a friend of mine who's a Meretz voter, and I said, are you guys worried? Because according to the polls, you guys are at 4 seats, which is never a good place to be. And he said, yeah, he has no idea why they didn't merge with Labor. He thinks it was a mistake. So yeah, I understand. The issue is, I think that what it does is it forces unnatural alliances. So the argument that we've heard from others is that you end up with these parties where they kind of agree on some issues, but there are a lot of issues that they don't agree on, and then they end up splitting apart after the election. So I guess that's really what the discussion is about, with raising the threshold, that you have unnatural alliances, and then after the election, everyone does what they want.
I think that the problem is not with everyone doing whatever they want, is that the breach of trust between the politicians and their voters. If everyone would keep their promises, I think that we would do good. I mean, and I think that Yesh Atid on that stand did really good. We didn't cave in, we didn't collapse, we didn't betray our values or our voters, and we kept true to our ideology and our values, and we are going to keep doing that. And I think again that an alliance between the Labor and Meretz is a natural alliance. And I think that the alliance between Likud and Ben Gvir is a natural alliance, unfortunately. It's the case.
So I do want to ask one policy question. So I mentioned earlier, I live over the Green Line. I live in Karnei Shomron. In the past, Yesh Atid has talked about a two-stage solution. They've talked about giving away some yeshuvim and not others. They've mentioned keeping the blocks, but not the minor blocks or the smaller, more isolated settlements. So I want to know, as a resident of Karnei Shomron, is my home at risk if Yesh Atid ever had its plan? Which yeshuvim are the ones that we have to worry about? Because I've tried to do calculations, how many people live in non-block settlements? And it seems to be tens of thousands, if not 100,000 people who live outside of the main blocks. So I guess, what is Yesh Atid's policy this time around? And how do you respond to those people? Yes.
As I mentioned, David, we do not change our ideology in every cycle of the elections. As it is, it's 3 months from one to the next. So we don't have drastic changes that require us to change our ideology or our values. No, your house is not in any danger under Yesh Atid's government, nor any house. We are not going evacuation or mass evacuation of houses of Israelis is not on the table, not at all. We are going to. I think that it's in our national interest to separate from the Palestinians. I think that I believe in a two-state solution, but I believe in a very tall wall that is going to split Israel and Palestine, or the Palestinian Authority, and under three main principles of Yesh Atid has put forth. The first one is that the main blocks, Ma'ale Adomim, Gush Etzion, and Ariel, are going to forever be under Israeli sovereignty. Second, Jerusalem is not going to be separated, because countries do not separate or split the capitals. Jerusalem is not going to be separated, as London is not going to be separated by or split by the United Kingdom, nor does Paris or Washington, D.C., even though I think that Canadians strive for a part of Washington, D.C. No, I'm just joking. So Jerusalem is not going to be split under Yesh Atid. It's our ancestral capital, and it's going to be united. And the third part is that Yesh Atid will make sure that the IDF has full access to all of the Palestinian territories. So if someone is planning a suicide attack or a terror attack in any basement, that the IDF needs to be able to go and infiltrate and just make sure that terror attack is not going to happen. And so we think that the path to reach there is a regional convention with the moderate Arab countries, the United States, the European Union, and the Palestinians, where we would sign not a final agreement between us and the Palestinians, but rather maybe a mid agreement that would maybe finalize 80% of the issues or 90% of the 90% of the issues at on stake. But we don't have to finalize everything, because I don't think that we can do it in maybe in our generation. Okay. But we need to strive for a separation between us and the Palestinians. So you can, your house is not at risk.
Okay, thank you. So that's it for the questions I have, and I'm going to pass the ball over to Meira.
Thanks, David. So I think I have time for one more question before we move forward. I'm sure that you noticed that most of our questions leading up to this section of our discussion were mainly day-to-day life policy issues, but I'm seeing that we're already entering more of the foreign policy land. I would like to get your thoughts on U.S. relations. In particular, there's a new administration in the U.S., and there's been a lot of discussion on whether or not the Biden administration will be friendly towards Israel or not, and who can best work with him. So I would like to get your thoughts on how do you think Yesh Atid would fare in dealing with the Biden administration, in particular on issues like Iran and continuing the Abraham Accords peace deals?
Sure. So first of all, the United States is the best ally of the state of Israel, and we have great ties, bilateral ties, both on a diplomatic level, on defense level, on cultural. You choose the topic, and we have the greatest relationship with them. Unfortunately, Netanyahu has made the bipartisan support of Israel to be a controversial issue in the United States. He has caused damage within the Democrat Party, and we need to fix that problem. We need to strengthen the ties to the Democratic and Republican Party, both because the bipartisan support of Israel is one of our best diplomatic and national interests. And so President Biden is one of Israel's greatest supporters, and I think that we have won a great supporter and ally of the state of Israel, and we need to strengthen and sustain the relationship between us and the new administration. And in terms of Iran, Yesh Atid, and Yair Lapid worked alongside with the Israeli government, with Netanyahu, with Democratic congressmen and senators in order to block the bad agreement which was signed by the Obama administration and the Republic of Iran. And I think that we need to work alongside with the Biden administration in order to make sure that Iran doesn't have or even get close to nuclear weapons. So this is in our utmost national interest to strengthen immediately the relations with the new administration in order to make sure that they sign or move ahead of making sure Iran doesn't acquire nuclear weapons, whether it's by agreement or by sanctions or in any other way. We cannot put aside any options that would prevent Iran from acquiring nuclear arms.
Thank you so much. Do you have any final words or final thoughts before we say goodnight?
Yeah, I do. I have some final remarks. So as I mentioned throughout the conversation, which was I enjoyed it. I think that it was very interesting, and I had a great time, and I feel privileged to have the opportunity to speak with you, Meira and David. So thank you. Thank you. I think that the elections are very dramatic to the state of Israel as we know it, to its image, to its Jewish and democratic character. and the citizens of Israel will have to pick between two options of government. One government which is led by Netanyahu, Ben Gvir, Litzman, and Smotrich, which consider Judaism in a very particular way, and in my perspective, a very crazy and ludicrous way of driving whoever who doesn't look like them or think like them out of the fence, and a more sane, stable, liberal government led by Yesh Atid. And that's why I think that Yesh Atid needs to be big and strong in order to make sure that we end the crazy cycles of elections and form a sane government that would end the crazy situation that we are currently living in.
Thank you so much. David, thank you for joining me in hosting the conversation. And Yorai, thank you so much for being a part of this.
Thank you so much.
Really enlightening and interesting, and we're really glad to have had the opportunity to speak with you. And thank you all for tuning in. Be sure to follow the Kerem House and Israeli Politics Simplified pages on Facebook to hear more about upcoming events in the Poli-Talks series. We already have a few scheduled, and there will be more to come, so stay tuned. Thank you all, and good night.